Buenas tardes a todos. Les solicitamos acompañarnos aquí ocupando sus lugares y guardando silencio. Asimismo, les comparto que tendremos un espacio de preguntas y respuestas en donde el doctor Ethan Dimitrovsky podrá resolver sus dudas. En nombre de la Escuela de Medicina y Ciencias de la Salud, TecSalud del Tecnológico de Monterrey, les damos la bienvenida a Gigantes de la Medicina. Nos da mucho gusto compartir la experiencia de los grandes talentos de la medicina y ciencias de la salud a nivel internacional. Enseguida, presentaré a las personalidades que nos acompañan. El doctor Guillermo Torre, rector de TecSalud y vicepresidente de investigación del Tecnológico de Monterrey. Nuestro invitado de honor, el doctor Ethan Dimitrovsky, director del Laboratorio Nacional Frederick y presidente de investigación biomédica Leidos. Doctor Luis Alonso Herrera, decano de la Escuela de Medicina y Ciencias de la Salud, TecSalud del Tecnológico de Monterrey. El doctor Manuel Pérez, decano Región Monterrey de la Escuela de Medicina y Ciencias de la Salud, TecSalud del Tecnológico de Monterrey. Sean todos ustedes bienvenidos. A continuación, cedo el micrófono al doctor Manuel Pérez para que nos presente la trayectoria de nuestro invitado especial.
Muchas gracias y muy buenas tardes a todas y a todos. Es un placer venir por acá a la Ciudad de México para tener también este evento que ya es una tradición, es una emblemática tradición de la Escuela de Medicina y Ciencias de la Salud aquí en el Tecnológico de Monterrey. Voy a cambiar a inglés para poder presentar la reseña de nuestro honorable invitado, Dr. Ethan Dimitrovsky. So I'm switched to English, and thank you very much for being with us. It's a real honor to have you here in the community of the School of Medicine and Health Sciences. Ethan Dimitrovsky graduated from Harvard University and Cornell University Medical College. He completed his residency in internal medicine at New York Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center and his oncology fellowship at the National Cancer Institute. Director of the Frederick National Laboratory for Cancer Research and president of Leidos Biomedical Research. An American Cancer Society professor, he was former provost and executive vice president of the University of Texas MD Anderson Cancer Center. Previously, he served as a chair of the Pharmacology and Toxicology Department, an interim dean at the Geisel School of Medicine at Dartmouth, and was chair of the board of scientific counselors for clinical sciences and epidemiology at the National Cancer Institute. As a physician scientist and oncologist, Dr. Dimitrovsky seeks to move his work from the bench to the clinic. An example of his key role in establishing curative retinoic acid-based differentiation therapy for acute promyelocytic leukemia, a treatment later approved by the FDA. He developed the genetic test used to diagnose and monitor therapy for this leukemia and received the American Society of Clinical Oncology and ACS Award and lectured for these discoveries. At MD Anderson, Dr. Dimitrovsky oversaw undergraduate and graduate programs and more than 4,000 clinical trials. He served as principal investigator of MD Anderson's National Institutes of Health-funded Cancer Center core grant. He fostered collaborations with 33 sister institutions in 23 countries and launched a pain medicine initiative for cancer patients in Ethiopia. He directs a laboratory focused on molecular pharmacology, is a member of the American Society for Clinical Investigation, Association of American Physicians, and a fellow of the American Association for the Advancement of Science. Dr. Dimitrovsky, it's a real pleasure to have you here, and please join us to start conversation. We are going to start conversation like is usual with our rector of TecSalud, Dr. Guillermo Torre, I know well known for all of you. So, thank you.
Gracias, Manuel. Vamos a hacer todo obviamente en inglés y vamos a tener oportunidad de preguntas y respuestas hacia el final. Entonces, So Ethan, I'm going to start just by talking to you, but just by, in this manner, telling everybody why is it that we created this program that we call Giants of Medicine. And the idea is just to have a brief, short, simple, casual conversation as if you and I were just having coffee. And I guess what we wanted to do is to bring the human person to accomplish physician or scientist, so that all of us that are at different levels of training can see how somebody becomes very famous, but not how it becomes very famous. What is it that it takes? And just for, I suppose for me, it's important that everybody understands that people as accomplished as Ethan are normal people, and we all can aspire to become that successful, which is part of what we want to do in education and training here. So that's really the goal. So with that idea in mind, I guess I'll just probably ask you, as you know, during your career in Houston, I spent many years in Houston, and some of my senior colleagues and friends are Texans, really hard Texans, and they hated Harvard education. So one of my former mentors says, how come you survive a Harvard education? So maybe why don't you start by telling us, how come you survive a Harvard education?
I've never been asked that question.
You've never been, but it is, and I will tell you who says that every single day. But
before I answer that question, it's a great first question, Guillermo. Let me first of all thank you. What a great privilege it's been for me to meet and get to know Professor Guillermo Torre. And I want to especially thank your dean, who is a dear colleague of mine, Dean Luis Alonso Herrera, who invited me to this occasion, and I feel really privileged to be here. And I've never been asked that question before, but I can tell you a secret, that if you go to a place like Harvard, you generally never tell people you've been there, because it's viewed as a bit of an elitist organization. So to be truthful, I don't ever talk about it, because I didn't feel at home there, because I didn't feel I was an elitist kind of person. And I don't feel I've accomplished that much in my career, other than the privilege, like you, of being a doctor, and the privilege of being a scientist. So I know for a lot of people, they aspire to be educated there. I actually never had that aspiration. I grew up in one of the suburbs of Boston. All my friends were applying there, so I thought, I'll apply there too. And I was kind of surprised I got in. My story isn't more interesting than that.
So, well, that's good. But so I didn't know. So you grew up in Boston, and
Yep.
So I guess in growing up, you never really looked at did you grow up in a family where science or education was really important, or were they in other fields, arts or business, or just working family, or what? Maybe tell us a little bit about your growing up before you got to Harvard.
Yeah, so let me begin by a bit of a disclaimer. I apologize to speaking to you in English. I assure you wouldn't want to hear me speak to you in Spanish. My family was an immigrant family. My father was born in Havana, Cuba. And so when my people left Russia, I guess you could detect from my last name, I come from a Russian heritage. When my people left Russia, my people were not welcomed into America. And the only country that would welcome them was Cuba. And it's a sad truth, and it's to my mind, a blemish on American history, that there was a period of time where people who truly needed safe refuge were not accepted into America. And so his story was very interesting because Guillermo, he was separated from his parents.
Your father?
My father was separated from his parents, and he was not allowed to travel with them to the United States. Instead, his grandparents, who came from Russia, first came to America, and then he was not allowed to travel with his parents. Instead, he traveled with his grandparents. And so he was separated from his family. and for about 5 years from his parents, and then he had to wait another 5 years before they were reunited. So I came from an immigrant family, and there wasn't this legacy of people who were educated in premier institutions. They were in the import-export business, but my father, after the war, through the GI Bill, was able to go to New York University in New York City, and he became an engineer. And so I always was intrigued by science as a youngster and thought that I would always become a physician, like yourself, a full-time practicing physician with administrative responsibilities. So my family honored education, but did not view it as a badge of honor. So it was, although when I look back on the summary of my career, it was never a plan to go to well-known institutions. It just sort of happened by chance.
If you didn't notice that all of those were first-rate, the best institutions in the field that he's...
They have to make a mistake sometime.
So Ethan, now I want to maybe touch on this topic of your family being a migrant, because I think there is something unique about when somebody migrates, or the family, they just sort of build some character that makes you thrive to success. And of course now, you know, it's interesting that Mexico is living an environment similar to the US. We have a lot of migration coming from Central America, and of course many of them want to go to the States, but many here, and so there is some good that comes out of that some people don't really want to accept.
Well, I think it's a very thoughtful comment that you make, Guillermo, that is there something that's sort of the crucible of life experience, right, that shapes you, or the crucible of life experience that shapes your family. I truly believe that played a big role in my own personal history, because I took nothing for granted, and I didn't think I was in any way special by matriculating at these well-known institutions. And so I was perhaps a bit of an outlier. I thought it was a privilege to be there, and I tried to work my hardest to do my best in everything I did.
So you and I talked earlier about partly your decision of becoming a physician. And so maybe why don't you tell us a little bit of what made you want to become a doctor? And then later we'll talk about the science as an important part of your life. But the decision in college, of how to become a doctor, is that something that was engraved in your blood from very early childhood, or just something that you felt that you wanted to do once you were in college?
Well, Guillermo, I don't precisely know the wellspring of that idea, but what I do know is I always wanted to be a doctor. And my vision was to become a practicing doctor of high regard, like you, Guillermo. That was my plan. And I thought a life of service, a life of giving back. I have to be quite honest, I felt quite fortunate to have the education background that I did have. And I felt someone like me could take it for granted, or to say, well, I should give back. And I thought one of the ways in life, professional life, that you can give back is to being in the healing arts, in whatever field you choose, to try to make a difference in the world by caring for one patient at a time, much like you do every day. And I thought that would be a worthy career to enter. So I was well shaped when I entered college to plan a career in medicine.
And then, of course, you went into oncology, and medicine and oncology. The decision to become an oncologist came during your medicine training,
Yes.
or was thought right going into med school?
Now, I wanted to take on a big challenge in my career. That's the one thing that I was certain of. I wanted to tackle a big challenge, and a challenge that affected many people. And I thought, what better career to enter than in the cancer medicine field, Guillermo? And I had a deep belief, perhaps just a feeling, perhaps just a sense, that during my career there would be remarkable revolutionary advances in the field of cancer medicine. And that idea was what drove me. And it's been borne out in the decades that I've been a cancer doctor and cancer scientist. I have seen remarkable advances that would have been thought of as science fiction when I entered college.
So science and medicine and the practice of medicine and science are really two separate careers that I firmly believe that they benefit from each other, and it's very good for a physician to understand science, and I think a scientist that see the other part also will benefit. And then there are a few people like you that have done both. Maybe tell us a little bit about the challenges of just combining a professional career, trying to answer the questions that will advance medicine, and then taking care of the patient that's suffering. You know, what are the challenges, the difficulties, and maybe the rewards? Because I think partly the career for many of you may be science, maybe as a physician taking care of patients, or maybe both.
What a great question, and a great springboard for us to have a conversation. So let me tell everyone in the audience and those who will watch online that hopefully what you've heard from my story so far is that I didn't come to where I am today in a pre-shaped manner. It was all by chance. It was all by experiences. But it was about making decisions. So probably the biggest decision I made is I wanted to do something that, for want of a better word, gave back to others and served humanity in some way. And I thought that using my knowledge to become a physician would be appealing. So I fully trained as a physician. In the United States, you go to medical school for 4 years. I did a residency in internal medicine for 3 years. And I did an oncology fellowship for 4 years. I started doing science after all my clinical training. So I'm going to give you an insight into how physicians think. And Guillermo, you and I just had that experience. He received a very worrisome call from a patient of his. I won't explain the details, but he had to sort out how he could help this family. And so physicians experience medical problems by developing pattern recognition. So a common disorder like myocardial infarction that an expert or renowned expert like Guillermo sees regularly, you don't really know what that is clinically until you've seen a few hundred cases. Okay, that's true for all of medicine. So physicians see the whole forest. What scientists do is they know there's a forest, but they've been trained very differently. They're trained in what is known as reductionist thinking. They look at the pieces of the puzzle, not the whole visage, okay? And those two frames of mind, looking at the building blocks that create the image, seeing the whole image, are completely distinct disciplines. So I just told you, I trained fully as a physician. And to become a scientist, Guillermo, I had to unlearn pattern recognition. It was really hard to do. And it took me about a decade. And something very, very interesting happened after about a decade. I then was able to incorporate both points of view. So when I am faced with a scientific puzzle, which is what scientists face every day, I'm constantly thinking of both the implications in health and also thinking about the driving forces that create a medical disorder. And that's the beauty of the career path that I've taken that I find as exciting today as the day I started. So that's something I'd like you to take away from this conversation. Guillermo and I know this, although he doesn't have to say it, find what we do as fulfilling and perhaps more so than the day we started. It's very fulfilling to give back using your intellectual skills to help others. I know you feel the same way. I don't want to speak for you, but I'm sure you do.
No, absolutely.
And so what I urge every one of you who are being educated here at this great university is to think how you could give back to society when you graduate, how you could have meaningful work. For me, what's more meaningful than to devote my energies to reduce suffering for cancer patients? And we do more at the institution that I direct. We improve the lives of those suffering from HIV, AIDS, cancer, and emerging health challenges like coronavirus. We were front and center in the pandemic response. We have a team in West Africa dealing with Ebola. And you know about the monkeypox outbreak, where we're front and center in that response, running clinical trials to combat that scourge of humanity. So I would say to you, this duality is what sets apart the training that lets you become Guillermo, a physician scientist, this dual view of the big and the small, the pattern recognition and that which leads to the pattern.
I always think on a physician scientist as having the reward of just seeing the patient that gets better and the fulfillment that gives you. It's difficult to see when you're a scientist only, although the scientist eventually will get the fulfillment to advance the treatment for the whole group of patients of the category, which will lead me to your perhaps, I don't know if that is true, but your greatest contribution to the field of leukemia, which is the targeted therapy, the retinoic acid, that I think it'd be nice for the audience to see how did that come about, which is, he developed targeted therapy against one particular form of leukemia, understanding that this particular mutation was a major contributor, but also a target for therapy. But so when you do that, you're helping hundreds and thousands of individuals that suffer from that condition, but it's a little distant from you. You have to be patient to get it. The doctor, when he takes care of a person who's suffering, you alleviate pain and you make them feel better. It's very simple, quick reward. And in science, it just takes time. And it's difficult sometimes to achieve the ultimate goal that you did. Because I think that will be, for every physician scientist, will eventually want to come up with an intervention that heals the illness that he treats. So why don't we maybe talk a little bit about, Ethan, about how did you come up with the story in the retinoic acid and leukemia? And how did that change your career?
So serendipity is a powerful word. And chance comes, it's said, to the prepared mind. But more importantly, it comes to the prepared body. And so all of us have serendipity strike in our life. But not all of us take full advantage, full measure of that chance, that good luck. And so chance, remember that word. Now I'm going to tell you the story. And it's an interesting story because it's all about chance. So I was a fellow at the National Cancer Institute in the United States. And I was taking on my first project. And I was offered a project that was simple and seemed so appealing to me. And it was in the early days of the discoveries of oncogenes. Oncogenes are cancer-causing genes. And one of the first to be discovered was something called the MYC oncogene. And we found in a type of mouse leukemia that when you trigger those leukemic cells to mature and die, the c-MYC oncogene precipitously fell and then rose within minutes of that trigger to differentiate. Differentiation causes leukemic cells to mature and die. And the idea was simple. Let's engineer leukemic cells that overexpress the c-Myc oncogene. I know I'm getting technical, but the ideas are real simple. And could we block that differentiation? So it sounds like a simple experiment. And we did that, and we found that we could block differentiation. And I published that in the journal Nature. So that's a prestigious journal. I felt so excited until I started.
Very prestigious, not just prestigious.
No, the story's more interesting.
The best journal.
So I started turning the pages of the journal, and I found 2 articles with the identical result as mine. And I said, boy, this is a competitive field. Okay, everyone with me? So that discovery got me my first faculty job at Sloan Kettering in New York City. And you would say, well, that was a straight path. Now I'll tell you the real story. I didn't know when I was offered this project, I was in a big lab of 35 people, 40 people. Every postdoctoral fellow was offered that project, and they all declined. Guillermo, I didn't know enough to know it was risky.
That was at Memorial Sloan Kettering?
No, that was at the National Cancer.
At the NCI.
So I didn't have the wisdom to know I should never have taken that risk.
Weren't they also looking at c-Myc in colon cancer? Wasn't there at that time also a big story on c-Myc and colon, or?
There was c-Myc everywhere at that time. But
I guess maybe
what the idea was, what you're getting at, so there were several family members of MYC, and you got it right. The thinking was each cancer was associated with a different MYC. That was the idea. That's what you remembered, right? So I just told you everyone was offered the project, and they all declined, and I didn't know enough to
decline it. So how many years by that time were you doing basic research?
2 years.
Which is not much.
Yeah, about 1.5 years, yeah. So now...
How many years have you been doing research?
So,
because if you're 2, now you're past that time.
Guillermo, no, this is not a compare and contrast. No. The story gets better. So a very visible result in Science. 2 other groups worldwide had the same result. Everyone wanted in on the project. And then when I took my first faculty position, which I largely got from that paper, my supervisors told me, under no circumstances will we let you continue in this field, because they wanted to continue. I said, that's okay, because I have no intention of continuing the field. This is where the story gets interesting. So I just told you a scientific result. Took a leukemic cell, it was immature, give a drug that will induce differentiation, it becomes mature, overexpress the c-Myc oncogene and prevent differentiation. But I'm a physician scientist. So what I wanted to do was the opposite. I wanted to cause human leukemic cells or human cancers to mature and die. And the drug that we used, I've been very careful not to talk about technical aspects, was a drug called DMSO that could never be given to people because they couldn't tolerate the drug. And so I was looking for a drug that might be able to cause differentiation, and I came upon retinoic acid because if DMSO was working at a level, let's say 1, the drug retinoic acid was working at 1,000-fold lower level. So that meant there must be a receptor, okay? And so I decided to set up my independent laboratory at Sloan Kettering to move differentiation therapy from the lab to the clinic.
So, but at that time, you had identified that there were retinoic receptors in the leukemic cells?
No, that's where the story gets really interesting. Is that, so I made that decision, and then I asked my mentors, what do you think? And they basically said, Ethan, you had such a promising career. We're so sorry you're going down this path. And so I said, well, I kind of feel like I want to do it. I'm probably not up to the task, but I'll work my hardest. And I told my wife it'll probably only work for 2 or 3 years, and then I'll go into private practice. And so the month I started my lab, 2 groups in the world cloned the nuclear receptors for retinoic acid.
I see.
And that was something I had no control over. And it was all good news for me.
But you had already done some experiments that would show that retinoic acid or with stimulation of retinoic acid in your cells would lead them to die.
Yes.
You knew that, but you didn't.
I had already done that.
You didn't know the mechanism or why did that happen.
Yeah, so that's true. And so we heard by luck, serendipity, that in China there was a study that retinoic acid, the very drug I was using in the lab, could cause complete remissions of a leukemia called acute promyelocytic leukemia, APL. And we decided to replicate the results. And we published a paper in the New England Journal of Medicine, I was the senior author, that showed that retinoic acid could cause complete remissions in this leukemia, but only occurred when there were rearrangements of the receptor for retinoic acid.
I see.
So then I get a call from one of the discoverers of the retinoic acid receptors, Ron Evans, and he said, let's collaborate. So we cloned the genetic cause for this disease and published it in the journal Cell. And I opened up the journal. An accompanying article was a competing article with the same result. And I'm a physician scientist. And so I said, well, what the field really needs, because whenever you have this rearranged receptor, you respond to the drug, someone needs to develop the companion diagnostic, the genetic test. So I did that. And we published that in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. And you probably used the test that we patented here in your hospital. And so for over the last few decades, I've been building on that result by asking a very simple scientific question that's been really fascinating to me. What are the signals downstream of retinoic acid binding to its receptor that induce the anti-cancer state? So this story is all about chance, right? It's also about something else, and that's something I want you to focus on. It's about informed risk-taking. Informed risk-taking.
So it is also chance, but pursuing it. There may be others that were exposed to similar observations and didn't pursue it, right? Yeah. So,
and Guillermo, that's why I say serendipity comes to the prepared mind, but it requires the prepared body. And so I work really hard at what I do. I don't say that in a self-congratulatory way, no. It's just because I don't look at what I do as work. Guillermo, do you look at what you do as work?
No. My wife is here. You can ask her.
Does he look at it as work?
No, but I think that's a common theme for
I didn't
everyone.
even have to ask him that question. I knew the answer. and can I give you a little funny vignette about this?
Sure.
So my wife and I met over a patient. She's a nurse, and I'm a doctor, as you know. And my wife thought I was a kind doctor. I'm afraid to ask her if she still thinks that today. So we met over a patient, and I work like Guillermo works. I work every day, but it's not work. It's a passion. Your husband has passion, right? And that's exactly how I look at it. But I have 4 kids. And you might ask, what do my 4 kids do? You asked me that question in the beginning. Not one is interested in science or medicine. So I've had an effect on my family. But my wife, I suspect like you, is understanding because she knows that this is my passion in life. And she lets me work. And, I'm grateful Terribly great.
No, so I think this is an important teaching point for everyone because I'll tell you a story. I had an uncle who worked in a company, and my uncle told me one day, I said, he retired when he was maybe 65, and he liked to paint, and he became a painter full-time following his retirement. And he said, during the 40 years that I worked, not one day I was happy with my work, which is really sad. And then he became happy, and then, so he was trying to teach me, or actually was sort of praising me, that I was very fulfilled and happy with my job, because I really didn't look at it as a job. So I think, so let me extract what you said, because, you know, Manuel said we've been doing this now for quite some time, and we all know individuals that are accomplished just like Ethan. And I think for me, the common denominator of most people that are very successful are, and successful in a whole complete way, is that they don't, not a single person looked at his job as a job.
Yeah.
And it is their passion, they're happy, it gives total fulfillment, and of course that you integrate with your personal life, and you have to have your family and your work in balance, but the work is never really work. And I think that is something that I hear over and over and over.
I don't know if this is too personal, but I'd like to ask you and your wife, what do your kids do?
Do you want to answer? Answer. I think people would like for... No, are you sure? She warned me not to ask her questions, but she knows that when I take advantage of it. But no, the same thing. Now you're asking me. Yeah. I'm on the other spot.
It's a little role reversal.
Okay, I'll take that. So no, none of our kids are in science. Now they all, I think they have a spirit of I think entrepreneurship, and they all have done their own things, but no science.
And when I asked my children why they were
I don't know why.
I asked them, and they said, "Well, Dad, we looked at how you worked, and we didn't want to reproduce your life."
But you know, so my kids work pretty hard, but I think, I don't know that I should say this in the campus of university, but I think their learning in the university gives them the ability to answer problems, and now with technology, they like their freedom as well. Yeah. So they like to do the job in places that are, to me, like just vacation, but they think they say they're working. I don't understand that, but they say they work. So I think that it's something that we growing up don't relate to it. Yeah. But I think clearly the work environment has changed, and people like a little bit the freedom. They like to work, and they're probably much more effective than the way we were before. But yeah, no, I think science. Why do you think that is the case? You think only because they saw you working pretty hard, but they saw you working hard and happy.
I think that they saw me working hard at the exclusion of other joys in life. And my kids, who are your age, care deeply of having a balanced life. And I don't think what you and I have done is be called a balanced life. You agree? Can I switch for a second?
Yeah, you can switch.
So remember, I was a professor for most of my life before I moved into my current job, and it's a joy to interact with the next generation. So I'm going to tell you something that...
Well, you can ask them questions too. If you ask me, ask them.
This is great. Can I tell a story first?
Sure.
So you saw my CV, right? But here's something that I never put on my CV. It's the most important experience I've had professionally, and it changed my life. So you may not yet have learned about this, but there was a terrible Holocaust in the Cambodian people, the terrible Khmer Rouge regime. And then President Carter at the time asked for medical volunteers. So I volunteered to go to Thailand to work in a refugee camp called Khao Dang. And there was a movie about this camp called The Killing Fields, if you've seen it. And these were people that I cared for with illnesses I've only saw in textbooks. I've taken care of beriberi, dengue. I know dengue is endemic in Mexico. A lot of malaria. A lot of diseases that almost are shameful for humanity, like kwashiorkor, terrible wasting syndrome for infants. And that experience changed my life because I thought someone with my background, how lucky I've been, how all the good opportunities, should really devote himself or herself to giving back. And that imprinted this idea that I would spend my career giving back in any way that I could. So now, decades later, at the Frederick National Lab, I treated a lot of malaria cases when I was in Thailand, in the Khao Dang refugee camp. A lot of malaria, I saw a lot of children sadly die of malaria. And now we're developing novel therapeutics, monoclonal antibodies, that can prevent the sporozoite from killing youngsters. And we published 3 papers in the New England Journal of Medicine, one with a challenge study. And this is all done in, this is team science, this is public-private partnership. We do our work with the World Health Organization, National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Disease. But we manufactured a monoclonal antibody against the malaria parasite that in a challenge studies, that is, if you expose people who are healthy volunteers, you could prevent malaria from manifesting itself. And it was an IV therapy. And then the next year, we published, also in the New England Journal, a monoclonal antibody 3 times more potent than the first. It was so potent we could give it subcutaneously. You don't need to be a doctor to know that IV therapy is much more cumbersome and difficult than just giving someone a shot in the arm. And so just a few months ago, we published with the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Disease and many, many partners, a 3rd study where we went into the field of Mali in Africa and we could prevent seasonal malaria. It gives me goosebumps to think that this might help so many people. And malaria is a problem that affects children, a lot of children, especially in sub-Saharan Africa. And so my message to you is, you have the whole world in front of you. Think for a moment, view from the lens of what could I do to give back to Mexican society, and maybe society even larger than Mexico. That's a worthy way to spend your life.
Ethan, did you look into malaria out of your own personal agenda, or was that an
No,
agenda
it was just an incredible, fortuitous cycle of life, right?
But you push it.
Serendipity.
Yep.
Serendipity. Good luck to be in the right place at the right time. And I'm giving you the story, but there's a lot of complexity to get there.
That is terrific.
Right.
So let me just tackle just the last few minutes before we open for some questions here. Where do you see the future of biomedical research? And you probably already led to the audience to assume a responsibility to give back in some way for all the benefits that we all have in our education and our professional life. But in terms of biomedical research, what do you think in the future will be sort of the most exciting advances? Where are we going to see biomedical research being transformed in the next, say, 20, 25 years?
So I would probably answer your thoughtful question not by pointing to an individual area that I think is most promising, but an approach that I think is most promising. When I came of age as a physician-scientist, the model was for scientists and physicians to work alone, maybe in very small groups. But the landscape of science has changed because, 1, it's too complex, and 2, not everyone can bring to bear in an individual lab all the technological expertise to solve a problem. All these examples that I talked about in malaria are not team science, but they're public-private partnerships. So what we're going to see in the future in your generation, we're going to see a shift from individual discoverers to teams of discoverers, and there's a place for everyone there. But you'll see something else. You'll see positive union of efforts for government, the academy, and the private sector. And you needn't believe me in what I just said. Just look to the coronavirus response. And I haven't told you about that, but we were front and center in that response, leading to 2 FDA-approved drugs for coronavirus that you're using in Mexico. But we were just part of the public-private partnership. And so that's what we're going to see. And there's tools that were the subject of science fiction when I trained. They're called artificial intelligence, machine learning. And we have no idea what those tools will bring to light. But I do believe fully and firmly that when those of you who may want to go down a path like I have gone down or Guillermo's gone down, that you'll do it as part of a team, and that's really a fulfilling career path.
That's great. So we're going to open the room for some questions, but I will start by asking the first question outside of the formality of this other conversation. And what are your hobbies outside work?
So,
Do you have a hobby outside work?
Yeah, so I'm an avid reader. I read all the time. And I have a wife whom I love. And we take long walks together with a very big dog who's a rescue animal. And he's about 80 pounds and a sweet dog. And we have a very close family. And so I spend all of my free time, what little I have, we vacation as a family together. What does that mean? My 4 kids, they're partners, or they're husbands if they become husbands. I have 3 daughters and a son. And sometimes their parents come along. And so we have a very un-American kind of family reunion. And actually, over the last decade, Guillermo, I haven't really mentioned this, and I don't put it in my CV, I kind of feel I've had some interesting life experiences and that I like to share with people. So I've been writing commentaries for newspapers about being a scientist and being a physician. And it seems like there's a responsive chord. People seem to want to know about this because the way scientists and physicians are depicted in the movies doesn't bear any relationship to any scientist or physician I've ever met. And I thought there was a giving back I could do. So I've spent the last decade doing that, and that's been a new side interest, like a hobby.
So I think we have more in common than what you think.
Yes?
Yeah. I guess I have the same hobbies that you do.
Does he have the same hobbies? How big is your dog?
No dog, but
No dog?
But you didn't ask me how many kids
Wait
I
a
had.
second, Guillermo. You're a cardiologist. You know that having a dog is health promoting.
I know, but
Yeah.
but
Oh, you had 3. Okay.
we did. But we have
Sophie
6
was-
kids.
6
6.
kids.
So that's why we didn't have time
Congratulations.
for a dog. But
There's got to be a physician or scientist in those 6 kids. Just wait.
so questions from the audience. So maybe, see, but we need to get your microphone because otherwise the people watching us online won't hear. Do you have a Juan Carlos microphone? So we'll have a couple of minutes for a couple of questions, but.
First of all, I want to compliment you on being a brave soul. Usually, when
It's always harder the first one, and then there'll be
first one,
plenty.
there's going to be plenty of other questions.
But we
Just
won't
mark
have
my
time
notes.
to do that.
Oh,
So.
okay.
No? Okay, you can take this one. Or, okay, you're getting another one. Or if you say it loud, I will repeat it. Just, Come over here. And then even harder. Here, I'll give you my mic.
Oh, there it's working.
Okay, I want to ask you, what has been your major motivation to become a physician and to give the good in society?
Well, what a wonderful question. I don't know what the origins of those feelings were. I was raised in a very ethical family. Ethics was very strong. And I was always taught I wasn't special. And I can tell you that, you know, I kind of wish my mother were here when you're describing my background, but I don't feel that way for a minute. I don't feel like I've accomplished much in my career. I'm just being sincere. But I don't feel I've done enough of giving back. And in my current position, I have a distinct, if not unique, ability to give back, especially the work that we do in global health. And I feel energized by that. I think that all of us are raised by families with values, and I came from a strong value-driven family. And I hope the same is true for all of you. And I think that can guide you in life.
Thank you.
Muy bien. More questions? Here, aquí.
You're close enough.
Okay, so you talked about chance and being prepared in body and mind, but I'm sure you've faced that moment in your life that all of us have faced, where you have a lot of questions to answer, and you just happen to need to choose one of those. So maybe you have this question in malaria, in cancer, in whatever. And many of us have like maybe fear of choosing wrong, you know? So how do you choose which question to answer?
So there's really two parts to your question. The first part is about the nature of risk-taking. The second part is about how you choose. So let's take them each in turn. So risk-taking has to be informed risk-taking. I'm not advocating for people to go out and take their chances in a riskful manner without assessing the risk. Informed risk-taking. I told you the story of the paper I published in the journal Nature that I didn't even know I was taking a risk. But I can assure you, I know when I'm taking a risk now. So when people talk about their careers, excuse me, they generally talk about their successes. But let me tell you the honest truth is, being a scientist, the practicing scientist, is about coping with failure. Most of the things I do in the lab don't work out. And so you have to develop resilience and a high work ethic and to learn from why things don't work. So of the 3 projects that are in my own lab that I'm running today, I've been working on these problems each for 10 years. And they're beginning to take shape. And there's a lot of frustration. But the way I coped with the frustration of experiments not working is I learned from them. And because I had trainees, people who took a chance to work with me, I had to make sure their careers were successful. That was a really powerful tool for me to have so that I didn't take undue risk for them. The other is that I do tell my trainees what is my assessment of the risk they're taking. And so generally when people come to my laboratory for training, I give them a project that I have every confidence will work, but usually those are not going to lead to the most visible papers. But they say, as you're doing something that's going to work, let's take a little risk together. And I've trained many people who've gone on to careers actually more visible than my own. I mean, the current president of MD Anderson trained in my lab, the former physician-in-chief at Sloan Kettering trained in my lab. And each person I trained, I said, let's take a riskless project that will advance your career, and let's take an informed risk. So most of what scientists do is not about success, but about coping with failure. And if you can't cope with failure, then you're probably not well suited to be a scientist. But because I was a cancer doctor, I was very familiar with failure of therapy. And actually, everything that I do in science, I turn to medicine to support myself. Not financially, I mean emotionally. And I found that when a patient succumbed to cancer, it wasn't my poor treatment, but it was the poor therapy. And that my charge was to develop a better therapy. So my first message to you and your thoughtful question is informed risk-taking. Second part of your question was, how do you decide? So running a lab, running a team, I'm a pretty hands-off kind of lab chief in that I let people make their own mistakes because that's how they learn. But I do provide direction. And because I've had so much failure in my career, I have a lot of direction to give. And I would say to the folks in my lab, well, don't go down this path. I've tried it before. It doesn't work out so well. And so I don't make the decision for the people who train with me, but I give them an honest assessment of why I would choose one project over another, and then I let them choose. So that's just the training style that I've developed.
Thank you, Ethan. So I think we're coming to a close, and
it's been great
so I'd like
fun.
To really
Next time, can I interview you?
Sure. Well, he and I talked a lot earlier in the morning, so. But anyway, I think I really want to thank you for sharing not only your professional but also the personal facts. And I think I really think it's important to leave everybody with a message that it is truly a matter of just working hard to achieve success. And success doesn't have to be the most famous person. It's just to be happy with your job. I think success will be when you come home from work and you think that you didn't work, that is part of your hobby, which has been for me, for you. So I think that is success. If you become president of an institution or a dean here or whatever my job is today, it's an after fact. It really doesn't really matter that much if you are not happy. So I think that's a good teaching point from this conversation. So really, I enjoy it and appreciate it, and thank you once again.
Well, I want to thank you all for being here. Thank you.
Agradecemos al Dr. Ethan Dimitrovsky por su participación como ponente, así como al Dr. Guillermo Torre y al Dr. Manuel Pérez por coordinar la sesión. A continuación, se le hará entrega de un diploma al Dr. Ethan Dimitrovsky por su valiosa e interesante participación.